Hey guys. Alright, well, I am back talking again about sex on the internet. So I have been a part of this Right to Desire campaign for the past couple months. I've really enjoyed being a part of this campaign and a part of the conversations that it has started online. I think it's such an important conversation. I think women's sexuality and, a woman's right to a good sex life is something that we really rarely talk about. In fact, I think when we talk about women's sexuality, it's often in this sort of resigned, I don't feel like women always feel like they have the permission to insist on their rights in this area. So I wanted to spend the next couple minutes talking about some of the key differences between men and women, and some of the differences that we see societally, some of the differences that might be inherent, might just be biological, and then some of the differences that we see in the medical community as it pertains to men and women and sex. So one of the things that we see, especially societally, and I mention this, is that women generally seem to suffer in silence when they feel like their sex life is not what they think it should be. They either don't talk about it, and these are obviously broad generalizations. There are, women who are perfectly cool talking about it. But there are many women who feel ashamed to talk about it, or who just minimize. And that is a trope that we see through television and movies. It's the idea that I'm too tired, I have a headache, I'm not interested, or I've got to go and do this for my husband. Now, of course, this isn't always true. There are lots of women out there that have an amazing sex drive who feel perfectly satisfied. But I do think we see many women who feel like they can't really assert themselves. Another thing we see that is interesting is that it seems to be normalized and even acceptable for a woman to fake it in the bedroom. I mean, we've got When Harry Met Sally, Seinfeld. I mean, I can think of so many examples just from pop culture of women talking about how they fake it in the bedroom. So there is something wrong going on where we do not feel like we can say, I don't feel satisfied. And I think some of that stems from, just decades-long patriarchy. I think some of it stems from some of the purity culture that came out of churches that has seeped into society at large. I know as I was growing up in a more conservative environment, the message we got was that men and women were so different, that we were biologically wired so differently, that men were always the initiators and women were the breaks. And so the talks that we had were around how men would handle their sexual desire, and then at the same time, how we women would handle the men's sexual desire. There was not a conversation that perhaps we would have our own sexual desire. It was more like how we would dress to keep the boys, in control of themselves. I think that a lot of us were raised not really understanding or believing that our sexual desire was normal, was good, and so I think that a lot of women are not in touch with the idea that their sexual desire is normal, is important, is something that, that she can kind of fight for. I also think that, in society we have these disparaging names for women who are very interested in their own sexual desire. We've got words like slut and whore and nympho that typically are describing women who are interested in pursuing their own sexual desire. And we don't have those same labels for men. And I think that is telling. The label for men is much less pathologizing. It's a bad boy. And it's much more acceptable for a man to be really pursuing his own sexual desire. Here are some facts around the medical community and sexual desire and the differences between men and women. So we have a much better understanding of the medical conditions that relate to men than we do for women. So let me give you an example. I was trained as a marriage and family therapist, and marriage and family therapists do conduct sex therapy for couples that are having trouble in that department. So I went to grad school. I had units on sex therapy. This is what I learned how to treat. I learned to treat erectile dysfunction, and I learned to treat premature ejaculation. That is the standard of practice in terms of what a marriage and family therapist would learn to treat in sexual dysfunction. And then maybe some brief conversations around, vulvodynia, things that were, but that would be like, we'll refer them out to a doctor. Never in all of my training did I learn about hypoactive sexual desire disorder and how that affects women. And what is crazy about that, and I know that is true for many therapists and even medical doctors, in the conversations I've been having around this topic, I've had many women say they basically describe the symptoms of hypoactive sexual desire disorder to their doctor, and the doctor was not able to make a diagnosis out of ignorance of the diagnosis. It is a defined medical condition. It is the most common form of sexual dysfunction for women. So again, we have doctors who are very well versed and therapists who are very well versed in the medical issues that affect men's sexuality. But there is a lot of ignorance still around women's sexual dysfunction. And if you are listening and you think, wow, I think this affects me, hypoactive sexual desire disorder is basically what it sounds like. It's when your sexual desire does not match your interest, when your sexual desire seems underactive, and that is causing subjective problems for you. There is a great resource online called right2desire.com. They do have doctors that you can do like online telemedicine with, and they know about this condition and are equipped to talk to you about it if that's of interest. So that's one way the medical community has this big disparity between men and women. Another way is in prescription drugs. Prescription drugs for men abound. There are many of them, and they are almost always covered by insurance. And we see those ads in Super Bowl, and we see that during prime time. We've all seen the ads for men's erectile dysfunction medications. There is medication for women's sexual desire disorders, and it is rarely talked about. Most people don't know about it. So again, if you want info on that, right2desire.com has a lot of medical information. And in another, not shocking disparity, that medication is typically not covered by insurance, where most of the medication addressing men is. Let's talk about emotional stuff, though, for a minute. There are certainly emotional differences in the way that men and women relate to sex. Now, these are broad generalizations. User experience may vary. I have certainly treated couples and know couples for whom this is completely flip-flopped. But in general, women tend to have more emotional concern related to their sex life. And what I mean by that is if things are off emotionally, whether it's with the relationship with the partner or even just generally. It doesn't have to be that my partner and I are fighting. It could be I feel emotionally off because I had a terrible day with the kids. It could be I feel emotionally off because I had a really bad argument with my mother. But when women are emotionally taxed, that affects their sex life. That absolutely affects their ability to get into that mode. And we find that men are just generally, again, typically, have an easier time getting into feeling sexual than women do. And then there's the whole concept of mental load. So mental load, if you're not familiar with it, there are some great articles written on this. In particular, there was a good article in The Atlantic talking about mental load. There's some great books that are coming out on this. But mental load describes the fact that in many partnerships, women tend to do the lion's share of the mental work. And that mental work can look like anything from being the one who is sort of top level organizing the family, handling the calendar, answering the phone calls. Not that their partner doesn't help, but the woman is the one who is in charge of checking the emails and it's always just kind of delegating and making sure everything's being done. Again, this is not always true, but in conversations with women, I find this is often true. And one of the preeminent researchers on relationships, John Gottman, one of the things he found is that when men really work actively at lowering the emotional load of their partners, meaning they become engaged, not just how can I help, but figuring out what needs to be done and doing it, not just waiting, for a delegation from a partner who's in a parentified role, but stepping up and really doing things equally. But what Gottman found was that greatly increased the intimacy between those couples. So I think that what we see a lot is women not wanting to have sex because they are taxed. Their brains are taxed, their emotions are frazzled, and oftentimes their partners just don't have those same feelings. So the partners are feeling great. The partners are like, hey, let's go. Let's get this done after dinner. Done meaning sex, not dishes. And, what we're finding is when men can look at what's happening in a woman's life and say, okay, how can I take some of this emotional load off? Then what happens is then women are more interested in sex. It sounds oversimplified to say doing the dishes might be the best form of foreplay that a man could do in a situation where there's an unequal sexual desire, but there really is some truth to that. Another difference between men and women is hormones, and women of a certain age, but also of many ages, we really are affected by hormones, and our sex drive is affected by hormones. This happens, there are many times in our life where our hormones can really affect our sex drive, and that can happen around childbirth, and then that can happen around perimenopause, which is, kind of the decade leading up to menopause when those hormones start sort of short-circuiting, but circus is a good word for it if you've been there. And then, again, menopause as well. So we have hormones working against us at times with our own sexual desire. And so that would be another thing, to check out with a doctor to see if there's something that you can do to get the hormones in check, if that is affecting your sex drive in a way that is troubling to you. So those are some of the big differences between men and women. I mean, I think another, even just biologically, is, I've heard there's a couple, Cliff and Joyce Penner, they've done a lot of sex research, and they use an analogy that men are like light switches, you just turn it on, and women are like computers, it has to be booted up and warmed up, and again, not true for every couple, but true for many opposite sex couples, where men are just, they are more ready to go, and women need to be warmed up. And so I'm going to offer some tips, but one of my first tips that's around that warming up is for women and men both to work on keeping the pilot light lit, so to speak, for women. And so what that might look like is making sure that every day there's some kind of passionate kiss that doesn't lead to sex, okay? Some kind of passionate, sexy touch that isn't leading directly to sex. The point of it is not to, okay, I'm going to, give you a massage and then get you in the bedroom. The point is, again, keeping the pilot lit for women, making women feel sexual and desirable throughout the week. That is going to increase her sexual interest. And then for women on their own, figuring out how they can do that for themselves, whether that looks, that's different for every woman. I know women who read romance novels to keep that energy going, or erotica to keep that energy going. masturbation to keep that energy going, that, for women to think about if this is something they want to improve. And again, if it's not, that's fine. But if this is an area of your life that you really want improvement in, be thinking about how you can keep your own pilot lit going. I think for women too, asking for help. If you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're in that state where you feel like, I'm constantly overwhelmed, I'm not interested in sex, but my partner is, have a frank conversation about that. Sit down and talk about the things that are making you overloaded and see if there can be some rebalancing in the hopes that your sexual interest can start to balance out too. I think another thing for, partnerships to do, if that's the situation, if you're in a partnership, is to have meetings about your sex life. Do not talk about your sex life during sex. That's a super bad idea. It's a bad idea because you're naked and you're vulnerable and there's performance anxiety and it can feel like a critique, okay? So make the mental note in the bedroom, I want to talk about this, whether it's I really liked something that just happened or, ooh, I didn't like that. Make a mental note and then make a business meeting. Make a monthly check-in for your sex life where you sit down at a table, clothes on, and you just say, how are we doing? And it's not a criticism session. It's both people coming to the table willing to hear and learn, and have that really open conversation with one another. Another thing for women, stay active. Get out and stay active. Move your body. This isn't about because your body has to look a certain way, because your sexual desire and your sexual desirability is not based on your weight. It is not. And if you have a partner who's making you feel that way, that might be something to seek counsel for. But I'm here to tell you that many of the couples that I know that have the hottest sex life are not, maybe what we would think of as what we would see as sexy in a Victoria's Secret catalog or something like that. Sex and desire and sexiness are not limited to a specific body type, and we've got to get out of that. But I say be active because research does show that when we're moving, when we're active, the endorphins that we get from that activity also affect our sex drive and can improve it. You could get your hormones checked if that's a concern. You could meet with a doctor if you want to make sure you're meeting with a specialized doctor. Again, I would recommend the righttodesire.com website because they are trained in this. Also, try to shift your narrative about sex. That, I think, is important too. And what I mean by that is oftentimes we hold false narratives about ourselves, about our life, about our relationships. And some of us have fallen into a narrative of sex is a duty. Sex is a thing I've got to get over. Get it over with. Sex is a thing that my partner wants, that I've got to put out. Try to really change that narrative for yourself that sex is for me. I have sex because I like sex, not because I'm doing it for my partner, but I have sex because I think sex is important and I like having sex. I think that when you can shift that narrative to sex actually as an act of your own self-care, not caring for someone else, but an act of your own self-care, that can really shift the narrative. And if there's things happening in your partnership and sex life that don't make it feel like self-care because you feel like you're not being taken care of, again, an opportunity for that business meeting to talk about how to make sure that you're coming to the table excited about sex. If things aren't working for you, if you're faking, if you're not finding it pleasurable, work on figuring that out so that you feel excited about sex. And then I think the last thing I would say is, and again, this is, if you're watching this and you are concerned with either the frequency or the quality of the sex life happening in your relationship, and you want to change that, make it a priority. And I don't say make this a priority if you feel totally fine how things are and your partner is not happy. But if you feel like, I do want to have more sex, like I know the benefits of sex, I know that this is beneficial for me. It's beneficial for my relationship. If you're feeling like for yourself, you want to be having more sex, figure out how to make it a priority. Put it on your to-do list, just like you would put anything else on your to-do list. Figure out those things that keep your motor running, and find the time in your day to do those things. And then again, putting self-care on the top of the list is really going to have those ripple effects to your own interest in sex. When you are taking care of yourself emotionally and taking care of yourself spiritually, when you are sharing your resentments and not holding things inside, when you're asking for help when you need it, the sex is just going to naturally, the sexual desire is naturally going to rise up. Anyway, those are some of the comments I have. If you guys have different observations on the differences between men and women, and again, these are broad generalizations, they don't apply to everyone, but I would love to hear from you in the comments. And if you have any other tips for women who are struggling with sexual desire, pop those into the comments too. I would love to hear from you.